Welcome to Crappy to Happy podcast, a special series on our Sacred Stories podcast dedicated to sharing the incredible stories of grit, grace, and love in our new book, Crappy to Happy, Sacred Stories of Transformational Joy. I am your host, Rev Ariel Patricia, and together we will answer the question, do bad things happen to good people, or could the difficulties we face be gifts in disguise? Today we are speaking with Mike Pitocco, whose story in Crappy to Happy is titled Change of Heart. Now, Mike is married with 3 children. He is retired after 33 years with the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation as a program coordinator in the department's drug treatment initiative. Since then, Mike has been a chaplain, a consultant with UC San Diego, and ministry director for Celebrate Recovery, a faith-based recovery program. So it's my absolute pleasure to say welcome, Mike Pitocco, to Crappy to Happy.
Thank you, Ariel. Ariel. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm really happy that we have your story, and it's fascinating to me. You know, not even just to start out on a gender issue or gender note, but we have a number of men in Crappy to Happy, men's stories, and I was just really pleased to see that, you know, the openness of yourself and the other men to share your personal stories.
I just think it's so important that we just be transparent. And I did not start out that way. Just took a lot of doing beyond myself, actually, a lot of good role models to bring me out of myself into a place where I realized the value of transparency for relationships and telling my story.
Yeah, when your story came in and I read it, I was really kind of taken back, and I was taken back on a couple of different levels. One of them was your willingness to tell such a personal story, and one in which, you know, you're not the knight in shining armor through the whole thing, Mike. I have to say, you know, you kind of start out going, I was like, what's going on? Like, you know, what the heck is he doing? And going through the process and really going, you know, I think it's a great, and the Crappy to Happy, I think in some ways really fits. And so I just want to acknowledge that piece of it too, not only your openness to tell your story, but your honesty and vulnerability to tell a story that again, you're not the knight in shining armor through the whole thing.
Yeah, well, you know, in my case, a lot of that came from a lot of great examples, and a lot of that was that prison-based ministry. At least initially, it was prison-based for me. Celebrate Recovery, and I saw a lot of examples of very personal testimonies from both men and women. Behind bars and again in my home church in the community, involved in that ministry where transparency was the key word, and being willing to say, this is where I was, this is what happened, and this is where I am today, and just awesome testimonies. It really spoke to my heart and impressed me all the more with the importance of, you know, if we don't tell our stories, who will? In my case, God did a major work in my life. Like you say, I'm not the knight in shining armor by any means, and so I give God all the credit, and he put some people in my life, my wife and Sharon in particular, and other folks that really spoke to my life.
Yeah, and I know the audience is thinking, okay, come on, tell us the story. What is it about? So if you could, you know, and maybe you don't want to give away the ending, I'll let you tell your own story, but share please with us your story, Change of Heart, that is in our book, Crappy to Happy.
Well, I'm glad to do that. The title of my story, as you mentioned, is Change of Heart. It's a story about an emotional awakening in my life, and one that not only saved my marriage, but literally turned my world upside down, and in a really good way. My world needed some turning upside down. I was raised in a large family, second oldest of with 8 children in the family. neither of our parents were raised in emotionally nourishing environments. As a result, they didn't really have the tools to provide that type of environment for my brothers and sisters and I. Their definition of love was, hey, you got a roof over your head, clothes on your back, and food on the table. Hugging and kissing, saying I love yous were not the norm in our house growing up. I mean, we had a lot of good times too. My dad had a good sense of humor. He was a great provider. He didn't make a lot of money, always worked side jobs in addition to his full-time job, which meant he was away from home a lot. And that, and the fact he was a very quiet man, made it hard to really get to know him. In my case, I was enlisted in the Air Force right after graduation. I dated along the way, but was never in a serious relationship until I got married when I was 25. And it was only then, after becoming a husband, and in my case, a stepfather also, that it became increasingly obvious that I was not emotionally equipped to be the kind of husband and father that I needed to be and I wanted to be. It was difficult for me in physical and verbally to express my love. Simple things like hugging and kissing, saying I love you were very uncomfortable for me. And it seems so strange now looking back and even saying that, but that time in my life, it was very much the case. By contrast, my wife Sharon was very loving, warm, very affectionate, came from that kind of a background. Her and my stepson Sean were very demonstrative with expressing their emotions. My inability to do so, very frustrating for me, which led into a lot of anger on my part. I became a very unhappy person, and that turned into a lot of satire on my part. Instead of communicating in a mature way, it came out very satirically, in a very cutting kind of a humor. And I just created a very toxic environment for Sharon and Sean. It resulted in our separating not once or twice, but 3 times. In the midst of all that, Sharon informed me she was pregnant. So my reaction to that and an encounter Sharon and I had a few years down the road with a pastor of a small church is really at the heart of my story. In my case, earlier in life, I used to like myself. I felt I was kind of an okay guy. And at this point in my life, I had become someone I really didn't like. I wanted so much to be a good husband and a good father. I really could not understand why it was so difficult for me to do what seemed so natural for everyone around me. So it was a really painful time. One day I was taking a walk along a dirt road near where we lived. By this time, things were a bit better at home. We just purchased a new house in the country. I had a good job. And I found myself walking along that road as I frequently did. But this particular day, I was asking myself the big questions of life. What is my purpose? Why am I here? Is life all about working, looking forward to the next vacation, accumulating material possessions, raising a family, working toward retirement, all good stuff, of course, but is that all there is? Just deep within, I knew there must be more to life than this. Later on, I would find out there is a verse in the Bible that says God has put eternity in everyone's heart. So deep within, we know that there is something beyond this life. So in my way, that the pain I was experiencing is what led me, I think, to ask those big questions of life and find answers to them. So God really used that in my life before I got to the point in my life where I came to know him on a very personal basis.
Mike, your story, and I appreciate, you're not giving away the finer details of the story, but there's stories within your story that you share in the book. But the process, again, really is a fascinating and beautiful process of of you moving from, being so much more open and trusting and loving, and you had an acceptance of God. There was the religious part as well, and I will give away one of the endings is, and you had said it before as well, that you're still married, even though that was a question at one point, right? You're still married, and that you have a loving relationship, and your life really, really turned around to a great degree based on your experiences you share.
Oh, yes. So, yeah, in a very big way. And it was not an event, it was a process. I mean, coming to a spiritual realization really was an event. But even then, maturity in any way, spiritual maturity or just maturing, in my case, just emotionally, it was definitely a process. Sometimes God will take something away from someone or heal them of alcoholism or drug abuse. I heard a lot of stories like that. In my case, it was anger and frustration and control and these kind of things. We're never healed of anger. We're human. I'm going to experience anger, but it was the way I handled that was wrong in my case. So yeah, very much of a process. Uh, uh, God continues to use Sharon in my life and as a wonderful example of just an open heart and being transparent. Other relationships in my life, a great relationship now with my children, which was not always the case. And so there was a lot of healing that came about, and it really just opened the door to relationships in general. And God just had a way of putting me in certain aspects of ministry or one-on-one counseling, whether it was behind bars at the local county jail or at the church or just generally out there in the community, to really put those lessons he taught me to use.
And I do understand it's a process, and you do explain that so well in your story. But what would you say if you could pinpoint? You mentioned anger, right? And so if we talk about pain points, and then maybe the gifts that come from it, would you say that the anger is would be your main pain point that you could point to, that was the big shift in your life, or something else?
I think for me that's primarily it. I could point to a few other things, but I became a very angry, unhappy person. It really just you hear about on how many times Sharon would tell me afterwards, the kids and I feel like we're walking on eggshells when we're around you, and it was true. I would try to do better. I would do better for a while, then I would something would be said or something would happen that I didn't hit me right. And it never came out in the way of physical abuse, but it was certainly came out in the way of verbal abuse and emotional abuse in my case. And I mentioned the fact I created a toxic environment, and that's the best way I can describe it at home. I just it wasn't the kind of guy that I looked in the mirror and I said, who is this person that I used to like? I didn't like me. How could anybody else like me? And I
Right.
God definitely used people in my life to point that out.
It's interesting because you mentioned it didn't go to physical abuse, but I would say that mental, emotional, psychological abuse, is abuse, right? And it is traumatic, and it is painful, um and it's important to acknowledge, and so I appreciate you acknowledging that you could see that there was hurt that was caused, and not hide behind something that says, well, I never got physical. So to your credit, I think that's important, and I want to just make a mention of that, because for listeners who are listening, if they are in relationships with people who have anger issues, or maybe haven't really gone through what you've gone through, and come out a different person, that they acknowledge that is trauma and abuse, regardless
That
if
is
it becomes
that
physical.
is that is such a good point, Ariel. I'm glad you really emphasized that, because I mean Bible says the tongue is a fire, and once those hurtful words leave our mouth, yeah, we may apologize later on, but they cause emotional scars that are just as real as physical scars, and oftentimes last much longer.
So for you, Mike, yours was really an acceptance of Jesus, an acceptance of God. It was a religious, conversion, I guess, to a degree. I don't want to misspeak, but speak to me, or in the audience, tell us from an emotional perspective, and there's a physicality to this as well. When you finally, the anger was leaving, you know what I mean? I mean, what did that really feel like on a personal level? Because I know sometimes, like, in my past, I would feel so angry, I'd feel like my body was going to just explode on me or something. And it's very difficult to be the person that's angry as well. It's difficult for the person angry, and it's difficult for the person whose anger is directed towards. But what could you describe when the anger was leaving, or when you realized much of the anger had left, like what that felt like for you?
Yeah, it was, the looking back, what made me aware that the anger was starting to leave is when something at home typically would happen, because away from home we get pretty good putting on the smiley face and acting right, at work, at church, wherever we might be. But at home, where it really counts, um, a situation would occur, something would be said, and I would just handle it better. And afterwards, I wouldn't even realize it at the time often, but later on, I would think to myself, hey, I didn't get mad where normally I probably would have. And I just started having little victories like that, just small victories along the way, nothing huge, but in my life, it was huge. And then slowly Sharon started noticing that too, and the kids, and the atmosphere around home just became lighter and better. And then this was after the point of my uh, Christian conversion. So I had a lot of tools I didn't have before. I mean, one of the scriptures that just jumps out to me is in Ezekiel. It talks about God says, I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. I'll take your heart of stone out of your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. And that's exactly what God did for me. And like I say, it was a process, not an event. Coming to the Lord and realizing what the gospel was in my life was an event, but the process of growing and learning to love and voice that love and express it in a verbal and physical way was just a lot of many victories along the way.
Mike, what would you like the audience to know, or what would you like to leave them with based on your experience of your story?
Well, we can live with a lot of challenges in life. All of us do. We can live and survive. Lord knows my Sharon did. My wife did. We can live with a lot of pain, a lot of struggles, but we have to have hope. Hope is what gives us that light at the end of our tunnel, whatever our tunnel might be. People who've been trapped for a long time, when they're asked what kept you going, oftentimes they'll respond by saying, well, I never lost hope. God met me at what was the lowest point in my life. And I'd like the readers to find the hope that I found in Jesus Christ, hope with a capital H in my case. And it's not a pie in the sky or I hope I win the lottery kind of a hope, but what the Bible calls a sure and certain hope. And as far as I'm concerned, that permanent, lasting kind of hope can only be found in one place.
That's such a beautiful message, and there's such a beautiful intention for our readers and our listeners. And I want to thank you, Mike Pitocco, for being, an author in Crappy to Happy, for having the courage to share your story, and for being my guest today on our show.
My pleasure indeed, Ariel. Thanks for having me. It's been a real joy and an exciting process along the way. Happy to tell my story.
Thank you. Thank you. And listeners, Crappy to Happy, Sacred Stories of Transformational Joy, which is book 2, our first book, Chaos to Clarity, Sacred Stories of Transformational Change, is phenomenal. And Crappy to Happy, Sacred Stories of Transformational Joy is, I would have to say, just as phenomenal, if not more. The open, honest, transparent, vulnerable, courageous stories shared are exactly for the reasons that Mike said, to inspire hope, to inspire you, for you to know that you are not alone, and to know that yes, there are gifts in disguise when sometimes it looks like, why is this happening to me? I'm a good person. That, hang in there and reach out when you need to, but that there are gifts. There are gifts in the process, and there are gifts in the pain. So Crappy to Happy, Sacred Stories of Transformational Joy is available through Amazon and booksellers worldwide, or direct from Sacred Stories Publishing. So thank you for listening to the Sacred Stories podcast. I am your host, Reverend Ariel Patricia. And until next time, as always, I encourage you to write your sacred story well.